What we have here is a classic Washington showdown. You've got Congress on one side and the Department of Justice on the other. It all kicks off when Congress passes a law that demands total transparency on the Epstein files. So, lawmakers go down to the DOJ to see these files for themselves. But what they say they found? Well, it wasn't transparency. It was a whole lot of black ink.
So the first move here was basically a legislative sledgehammer. Congress didn't just, ask politely, they passed an actual law, legally forcing the Department of Justice to release every single file related to Jeffrey Epstein. The whole point, they said, was absolute total transparency.
You'd think a law would settle it, right? Nope, not even close. When lawmakers actually went to review the materials, they came out saying the promise of transparency just didn't match the reality of what they were shown. And that gap, that's the spark that lit the fuse on this whole public fight.
So how did we even get to this point? Well, it all started with something you almost never see in Washington these days. Pretty much everyone agreed on something. Congress actually came together to force this whole issue of disclosure.
And at the very center of this whole thing is a piece of legislation called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. This thing sailed through the House, got signed into law, and it made it a legal requirement. Let me stress that, not a request, a requirement for the DOJ to publish all of these materials for the public in a way we could all search and download.
So how did they sell this to the public? It was really simple, based on 3 core ideas. 1, release the files. 2, protect the survivors. And 3, as they put it, no games. It was supposed to be this straightforward, airtight promise of transparency. No loopholes, no delays. Simple as that.
Okay, so the law's on the books. What's next? Well, verification. Congress wasn't just going to take the DOJ's word for it. Of course not. Key members decided they had to see the unredacted version with their own eyes in person.
And look, this in-person visit was absolutely crucial. Congressional oversight isn't just for show. It's not symbolic. It's about actually verifying that the executive branch is doing what the law says it has to do. This whole visit was meant to confirm the DOJ was following both the letter and the spirit of this new law.
And here it is. This is the quote that basically lit the fuse. After they got out of that review, lawmakers went straight to the public and said flat out, what DOJ presented doesn't match what the law promised. This was the exact moment this whole thing went from a quiet procedural check to a very loud, very public fight. So this really becomes the heart of the matter, doesn't it? It stops being just another political squabble. It turns into a fundamental legal question. Did the Department of Justice actually comply with the law that Congress passed? And lawmakers were sending a pretty clear signal that, in their view, the answer was a hard no.
So, that in-person review didn't fix things. Not at all. So Congress did what it always does when it wants to turn up the heat. It took the fight straight to the press, straight to the cameras. This quiet disagreement was about to get very, very public. And these weren't just vague complaints either. The accusations were specific, and they were serious. You had elected officials, members of Congress, going on the record saying they believed the DOJ was hiding names and blacking out way more information than the law allowed. They were basically accusing them of just putting on a show of compliance.
And then this detail came out, and it became this powerful symbol of the whole problem. To review literally millions of pages of documents, lawmakers were reportedly given just 4 computers.
So, with their public statements not really getting the job done, Congress started to turn up the dial. And that whole 4 computers thing, it became a huge part of their campaign, because whether the DOJ meant it that way or not, it painted this picture of controlled access instead of the open transparency they were promised.
And then the pressure escalated to a whole other level, a constitutional level. Reports started swirling that some lawmakers were talking about using the speech or debate clause. Now, this is a really big deal. It's a powerful and very rarely used protection that could let them stand up on the House floor and just read the names they believe are being hidden. It would be a dramatic way to force the issue, and they'd be legally protected while doing it.
So the fight moves from the press into a formal, official hearing. And now the issue is being put directly to the Attorney General, in this case, Pam Bondi. You've got members of Congress just grilling her on transparency and, crucially, on how the department has been handling the victims.
But the most powerful moment in that whole hearing wasn't a question at all. It was this very deliberate, almost courtroom-style move. First, lawmakers asked all of the Epstein survivors who were there in the room to please stand up. And then, once they were all standing, they were asked one simple follow-up question.
The question was simple.
If you still haven't met with anyone from the Department of Justice, raise your hand. And according to everyone who was in that room, every single one of them raised their hand. I mean, that visual is just more powerful than any speech could ever be. It created this undeniable, on-the-record moment of pure accountability.
And really, from that moment on, Congress framed this whole debate as a fundamental crisis of trust. This wasn't just about documents and redactions anymore. It was about the credibility of the entire process and the credibility of the institutions themselves.
So it all boils down to two huge problems that Congress laid out. First, you have victims saying the DOJ hasn't even heard them out. And second, you have lawmakers saying the supposedly unredacted files were in fact not unredacted at all.
And that leads to the ultimate point they're making here. You can have a process. You can check all the boxes you want. But if the public, if the victims, and if the lawmakers who are supposed to be providing oversight have zero confidence in it, then the process itself has failed. Because when it comes to justice and transparency, confidence isn't just part of the point. Confidence is the entire point. Which, of course, brings us to the big unresolved question. Now what? Congress has already taken several steps, right? Each one has ramped up the pressure on the DOJ. But where do they go from here? So let's just quickly recap the playbook so far. They passed the law. They showed up at the DOJ to check their work. They went public with their concerns, and then they put the survivors on the record in that incredibly powerful hearing. So this is the final question it all comes down to, really. Should Congress escalate this even further? We're talking subpoenas, more hearings, maybe even using those constitutional powers to force disclosure. Or is this it? Is what we're seeing right now with all the redactions as transparent as this can possibly get while still legally protecting things like ongoing investigations or personal privacy? That right there is the heart of the entire debate.